Imagine this for a second. You walk into a room full of people. Some look excited. Some seem distracted. Others have that guarded expression, like they're carrying something heavy on their minds. Now ask yourself an honest question. How many of those people are actually thinking about you? Not many. In fact, most of them are probably thinking about the exact same thing you're thinking about, themselves, their problems, their worries, their goals, their ambitions, just like you, just like me. And that simple realization, something that sounds almost obvious when you first hear it, is exactly where Dale Carnegie begins. Because one of the biggest mistakes we make is assuming people think about us as much as we think about ourselves. They don't. And once that truth really sinks in, something starts to change. The way you communicate changes. The way you handle disagreements changes. The way you build relationships changes. In many ways, your entire understanding of people changes. That's what makes How to Win Friends and Influence People such a remarkable book. This isn't a book about manipulation. It's not a collection of tricks to make people do what you want. It's something much deeper than that. It's a guide to understanding human nature, understanding what people truly want, and learning how to create genuine connections that actually last. So instead of walking through this book chapter by chapter, let's take a different approach. Let's experience it as a journey into why people behave the way they do, and what happens when we finally learn how to understand them. Think back to the last time someone criticized you. Maybe it was your boss. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a friend. What happened inside your mind? Did you instantly say, "You're right. That's completely my fault"? Probably not. More likely, something tightened inside you. You wanted to explain yourself. You wanted to defend your actions. Maybe you even felt the urge to push back. And that's completely normal. Because Carnegie points out something fascinating about human beings. Most people don't see themselves as wrong, even when they are wrong. Even criminals often justify their actions to themselves. People protect their self-image. They protect their sense of identity, which means that when we criticize someone, we're usually not correcting behavior. We're attacking pride. And when pride feels threatened, people rarely improve. They become defensive. This is where one of the most famous lessons in the entire book appears. Don't criticize. Don't condemn. Don't complain. Simple words, but incredibly difficult to live by. Think about your own day. How often do you silently criticize people? How often do you complain about coworkers, classmates, family members, or strangers online? Most of us do it constantly. Yet if we're honest, how often does criticism actually create meaningful change? Not very often. Picture two managers. The first manager points out every mistake, every failure, every weakness. Over time, the team becomes cautious, defensive, afraid to take risks. Now, picture another manager, someone who notices effort, someone who acknowledges improvement, someone who treats people with respect. That environment feels completely different. People feel safe enough to grow. Because here's the lesson Carnegie wants us to understand. People don't grow when they feel attacked. They grow when they feel valued. Now let's go a little deeper. If criticism isn't the answer, then what is? Carnegie's answer is surprisingly simple. Appreciation. Not fake compliments. Not flattery. Not saying nice things because you want something in return. Real appreciation. The kind that comes from genuinely noticing another person. Think about the last time someone sincerely appreciated you. Not because they had to. Not because they were being polite, but because they truly meant it. Maybe someone told you, "I really admire how you handled that situation." Or maybe they simply said, "You've been working really hard, and I noticed." How did that feel? Chances are, you still remember it. That's because every human being carries a deep desire inside them. A desire to feel important. Not superior. Not better than everyone else. Just important. To feel like their efforts matter. Like their existence matters. Like they matter. Carnegie believed this desire is one of the strongest forces driving human behavior. People chase success because they want recognition. People argue because they want their importance acknowledged. People buy things because of how those things make them feel about themselves. Again and again, beneath the surface, we find the same need. The need to matter. And once you understand that, relationships start making a lot more sense. Imagine coming home after a long day. Instead of immediately focusing on yourself, you notice something your partner did. Something small, maybe something most people would overlook. And you simply say, "Thank you. I really appreciate that." Seems insignificant, doesn't it? But often those small moments create the strongest connections. Imagine an employee who's been quietly working hard for months. No recognition, no praise, no acknowledgement. Then one day their manager says, "I've noticed your effort lately. You're doing a great job." That one sentence can completely change how they feel. Because appreciation creates something criticism never can. Trust, loyalty, motivation. Now here's where Carnegie introduces another idea that changes everything. Let me ask you something. When you want someone to do something, what's your first instinct? Most people explain what they want. They persuade. They pressure. They insist. They focus on their own goals. But Carnegie flips the entire equation upside down. He asks a question most people never think about. Why would someone care about what you want? After all, they're busy thinking about what they want, just like everyone else. So instead of asking, "How do I convince this person?" the better question becomes, "How do I connect what I want with what they want?" It's such a simple shift, but it changes everything. Imagine trying to get a child to eat vegetables. You say, "Eat them because I said so." Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. Usually, it doesn't. Now, imagine saying, "These will help you run faster during your game." Suddenly, you've connected the action to something the child actually cares about. Now, there's motivation. Now, there's interest. Now, there's a reason. The principle works everywhere. Business, leadership, friendships, parenting. People rarely respond well to pressure, but they respond incredibly well when they see how something benefits them. That's not manipulation. That's understanding human nature. And according to Carnegie, real influence begins right there. Now, let's move into one of the most fascinating parts of the book. How do you make people genuinely like you? Most of us approach this completely backwards. We try to impress people. We talk about our achievements, our experiences, our knowledge. We work hard to appear interesting. But Carnegie argues that the fastest way to become interesting is to become interested in other people, their stories, their experiences, their dreams, their struggles. There's a famous example he uses that's almost impossible to forget. A dog. Think about it. A dog doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't tell you how smart it is. It doesn't brag. It doesn't compete for attention. It simply sees you and becomes excited. Its attention is completely on you. And because of that, most people instantly feel warmth toward it. Now compare that to someone who talks about themselves nonstop. Someone who turns every conversation back to their own life. Which person would you rather spend time with? The answer is obvious. And yet most of us still spend far more time trying to be interesting than being interested. That's where the real shift happens. Instead of asking, "How do people see me?" start asking, "How can I make people feel seen?" That one question can transform your relationships. Because when people feel seen, they feel valued. When people feel valued, they remember you. Ask questions. Listen carefully. Remember small details. Follow up on things they told you weeks ago. Most people never experience that level of attention, which is exactly why it stands out. And that brings us to something almost ridiculously simple, yet incredibly powerful. A smile. At first glance, it sounds too basic to matter. A smile? Really? But think about your average day. How many tired faces do you see? How many stressed faces? How many people walking around carrying invisible burdens? Now imagine one person looks at you and genuinely smiles. Not a fake smile. Not a forced customer service smile. A real one. Something changes instantly. You relax. You soften. You respond. Without saying a single word, that smile communicates a message. A powerful one. "I'm glad you're here. You matter. I see you." Carnegie believed a smile carries emotional energy. And honestly, he's right. You've probably heard people say they can hear a smile through the phone. Because they can. It changes your tone, your warmth, your presence. And sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest impact. One smile, one greeting, one moment of kindness. That's often all it takes to completely change the feeling of an interaction. Now, let's talk about something that seems small, but carries far more weight than most people realize. Your name. Think about it for a moment. Out of all the words you've ever heard in your life, your name is one of the most important. It's tied to your identity, your memories, your sense of self. That's why Carnegie emphasizes a habit that sounds almost too simple. Remember people's names. Not because it's a clever networking trick, because it makes people feel recognized. And recognition is powerful. Think about how it feels when someone remembers your name after meeting you only once. You immediately feel seen. You feel important. Now, think about the opposite. Someone you've met several times still can't remember your name. It creates distance. Not because they're a bad person, but because forgetting someone's name often feels like forgetting the person themselves. There's a difference between hearing, "Hey," and hearing, "Hey, Muhammad." It's subtle, but emotionally it means everything. In a world where so many people feel invisible, remembering someone's name is one of the easiest ways to communicate respect. And speaking of respect, let's talk about a skill that might be even more valuable. Listening. Real listening. Not pretending to listen. Not waiting for your turn to speak. Not nodding while secretly planning your next response. Actual listening. The kind where your attention is completely on the other person. Think about your own life. How often do you meet someone who genuinely listens? Not many. Most conversations are really just two people taking turns talking. One person speaks, the other waits. Then the roles switch. But very few people truly listen. And that's why great listeners are so memorable. Carnegie points out something fascinating. People often believe they enjoy spending time with great speakers. But in reality, they usually enjoy spending time with great listeners. Because great listeners make people feel important. Imagine walking away from conversation, thinking, "Wow, that was an amazing conversation." Then you realize something funny. You actually did most of the talking. The other person simply listened, asked thoughtful questions, paid attention, showed genuine interest, and somehow that made the conversation unforgettable. That's the magic of listening. It costs nothing, yet its value is enormous. Now, let's move into one of the most surprising lessons in the entire book. A lesson that many people resist hearing. You can't win an argument. At least, not in the way most people think. Sure, you can prove your point. You can present evidence. You can demonstrate that you're right. You can completely destroy the other side's logic. And yet, you still lose. Because the moment someone feels defeated, embarrassed, or attacked, their defenses go up. And when defenses go up, minds close, not open. Think back to an argument you've had. Did the other person suddenly change their entire worldview because you proved them wrong? Probably not. If anything, they became more committed to their position. That's human nature. We don't like being told we're wrong. Our ego fights against it. That's why Carnegie suggests something different. Instead of arguing, respect the other person's opinion, even when you disagree, especially when you disagree. Imagine saying, "You know what? I might be wrong." Or, "Let's look at this together." Notice how different that feels. The tension immediately drops. The conversation stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a collaboration. Suddenly, both people are searching for the truth instead of trying to win. That's emotional intelligence in action. Because real influence isn't about defeating people. It's about helping them see something without making them feel small. And that leads directly into another lesson that's surprisingly difficult. Admitting when you're wrong. Sounds simple. In reality, it's incredibly hard. Because our ego hates it. Our pride hates it. Every instinct tells us to defend ourselves, to explain, to justify, to protect our image. But Carnegie argues that admitting mistakes quickly is one of the most powerful things a person can do. Think about someone you've respected in your own life. Maybe a teacher, maybe a leader, maybe a parent. What happens when they make a mistake and openly admit it? You usually respect them more, not less. Because honesty creates trust, and trust creates influence. When someone says, "You're right, that was my mistake," the entire emotional dynamic changes. The fight disappears. The tension dissolves. The need for conflict fades away. Instead of resistance, you get cooperation. Instead of defensiveness, you get respect. It's one of those rare situations where humility becomes strength. And once you see it happen, you start noticing it everywhere. Now imagine another situation. You need someone to improve. Maybe it's an employee. Maybe it's a student. Maybe it's your child. Maybe it's a friend. Most people immediately jump into correction mode. Point out the mistake. Explain the problem. Tell them what they did wrong. But Carnegie suggests a completely different approach. Start with genuine praise. Find something they're doing right. Something real. Something honest. Then, only after establishing respect, introduce the area for improvement. Why? Because people become more open when they don't feel attacked. When someone feels appreciated, their guard comes down. They're far more willing to listen. And Carnegie takes it a step further. Before pointing out someone else's mistakes, talk about your own. Tell them about a time you struggled, a time you got it wrong, a lesson you had to learn the hard way. Immediately, the conversation changes. Now it doesn't feel like criticism. It feels like guidance. It feels human. And people respond to that far better than lectures ever could. Now let's go even deeper. Imagine you're leading a team. Or maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're simply trying to help a friend make a better decision. What's the fastest way to create resistance? Giving orders. People don't like being controlled. Even when the advice is good. Even when the instruction is correct. The moment someone feels forced, something inside them pushes back. That's why Carnegie encourages a completely different approach. Ask questions. Instead of saying, do this, try asking, what do you think would work best here? Instead of giving the answer immediately, invite people into the process. Because when people feel involved in a decision, they become invested in it. An investment creates commitment. Think about two leaders. One constantly gives commands. The other asks thoughtful questions and encourages participation. Which leader creates more ownership? Which leader inspires more initiative? The answer is obvious. People support what they help create. And that's one of the most powerful principles in the entire book. Now let's talk about something every single person has experienced. Embarrassment. We've all been there. Corrected in front of others. Called out publicly. Made to feel small. Maybe it happened years ago, and somehow you still remember it. That's because humiliation leaves a mark. Far deeper than most people realize. Carnegie understood this, which is why he repeatedly emphasizes an important idea. Let people save face, even when they're wrong, even when they've made a mistake, even when correction is necessary. Protect their dignity, because dignity matters. More than pride, more than ego, more than being right. Imagine an employee makes a mistake. One manager criticizes them publicly. The other speaks to them privately and respectfully. Both managers address the problem, but only one preserved the person's self-respect. And that's the manager people will trust. Influence grows when dignity is protected, not when it's destroyed. Now we arrive at one of the most beautiful ideas in the entire book. An idea that feels almost magical once you start noticing it. Give people a reputation to live up to. Think about the labels people receive throughout life. Some are positive, some are negative. And over time, people often start acting in ways that match those labels. Tell a child they're irresponsible often enough, and eventually they may believe it. Tell someone they're unreliable often enough, and that identity can begin to stick. But Carnegie flips this idea around. What if you gave people a positive identity instead? What if you said, you're the kind of person I can count on? Or, you're a natural leader? Or, I know you're someone who always tries to do the right thing. Something remarkable happens. People start wanting to live up to that image. They begin acting in ways that support it. Because deep down, most people want to become the best version of themselves. Sometimes they simply need someone to believe in them first. That's why this principle is so powerful in parenting, in leadership, in friendships, in relationships. People often rise to the expectations placed upon them. And when those expectations are positive, the results can be extraordinary. Now, pause for a moment and think about everything we've covered. Think about your own life, your family, your friendships, your workplace, your classroom, your daily interactions. Where do most conflict come from? Usually not from bad intentions. Usually not from evil people. More often, they come from misunderstanding, from ego, from feeling ignored, from feeling unappreciated, from feeling unheard. And when you look back at Carnegie's lessons, you start seeing a pattern. Understanding instead of criticism. Appreciation instead of neglect. Listening instead of interrupting. Respect instead of judgment. Empathy instead of ego. At first glance, these seem like communication skills, but they're really much more than that. They're a philosophy for dealing with people, a way of moving through life, a way of creating stronger relationships wherever you go. But here's something important, maybe the most important thing in the entire book. These principles only work when they're genuine. If you use them as tricks, people will feel it. If appreciation isn't sincere, people will notice. If interest is fake, people will sense it. If kindness becomes a strategy instead of a value, it loses its power. The goal isn't to manipulate people. The goal is to genuinely understand them, to genuinely respect them, to genuinely care about them. And when that happens, these principles stop feeling like techniques. They simply become part of who you are. And that's when relationships begin to transform. Now, imagine something for a moment. Imagine a world where people felt heard. A world where people felt appreciated. A world where people felt respected. Imagine how different conversations would be. How different workplaces would be. How different families would be. Now, imagine being the person who creates that feeling for others. Not because you're trying to gain something. Not because you're trying to win. But because you understand something fundamental about human nature. Every person you meet is carrying an invisible desire. A desire to matter. A desire to be valued. A desire to be understood. And the people who recognize that, the people who respond to that, often become the most influential people in any room. Not because they're the loudest, not because they're the smartest, not because they're the most impressive, but because they understand people. And in the end, that's really the heart of this book. The biggest lesson Dale Carnegie leaves us with is both simple and profound. If you want to influence people, don't try to control them. Understand them, respect them, appreciate them, elevate them. Because when people feel important, they stop resisting you. They begin trusting you. They begin supporting you. And perhaps most importantly, they remember you. So the next time you walk into a room full of people, remember where we started. Most people aren't thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves, their hopes, their fears, their struggles, their dreams. And once you understand that, everything changes. It's not about being impressive. It's about being interested. It's not about winning arguments. It's about winning hearts. And in the end, the people who succeed most in life are rarely the people who know the most. They're the people who understand people the best. And that, more than anything else, is the timeless wisdom of how to win friends and influence people.